Bardar, good morning. I'm Councillor Peter Lewis, Chair of the Fire Authority. Welcome everyone to today's executive meeting where we are all attending remotely. All microphones will be muted unless you wish to speak. Please indicate if you wish to speak by using the raised hand function found by clicking the participants icon on your screen. At the appropriate time, I will call out your name and you will need to turn your microphone on. If you have cause to leave the meeting, can you ensure that you have turned your microphone and video off? So we'll now move to the agenda. And first of all, can I welcome Eros Lake and Nick Selwyn of Audit Wales, who are joining us today. Item 1, apologies. I've had 3 apologies, Richard Griffiths, Adrian Tansley and Gethin Williams. Have members got any other apologies they wish to raise? Okay. Item 2, declarations of interest. See no raised hands. So I haven't been advised of any urgent matters. So if we move to item 4, which is the minutes of the last meeting, I'll just go through them page by page for accuracy before I ask proposer and seconder. Page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So would somebody like to propose them as a true record?
Derpin. Eric Davis, Derpin.
Opposed.
All in favour? Thank you very much. Then move on to item 5, matters arising. Any officers got any matters they wish to raise? No. Now move on to item 6, which is the COVID update, and ask the Chief Officer to deal with this item. Thank you.
The office, good day. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. I think the COVID update is, as you would expect, in line with the rest of the country. We are seeing a relaxation and a reduction in our activity in respect of COVID. Very much the emergency phase is now being scaled back, and we are moving strongly into the recovery phase. And you'll be pleased to note that we are fully involved as a service in recovery activities through the existing structures. In terms of our assistance to other agencies, we are still providing very low levels of assistance to the Wales Ambulance Service Trust in the form of drivers, but that is an extremely low level at the moment. I advised you in previous meetings that we were planning to take part in the vaccination programme to assist with that, but that work has been halted. We're no longer taking any part in the vaccination programme. I suppose of some concern is that we, in common with the rest of society, are still seeing some staff members who are experiencing what's been called long COVID, and we have a number of staff members, a small number, but nevertheless a number of members off still on sick leave with long COVID, and we will continue to monitor that situation because again, in common with the rest of the world, it's something that's very new to us, and we don't really understand yet the impact of that in terms of how long we can expect people to be absent, and how long it will take them to fully recover to regain their fitness. And finally, from me, just really on a comment on the way that we're working at the moment. For some time now, for well over a year, we have been working in a completely different way. Staff have been working from home where possible, and there's been minimal activity in any of our buildings other than our fire stations. That is likely to continue in the medium term. We are looking at what the post-COVID future looks like as part of the transition work that we're doing, but it's likely that there won't be a return, certainly won't be a return fully to the pre-pandemic ways of working at all, I would imagine. But some of those activities that we would look to return to, or some of the ways of working we'd look to reinstate, are unlikely to be reinstated in the medium term. So, I think we're looking at a period of months before we can start to return people to their offices, for example. So, Chair, that's just a very brief overview, but I'd be very happy to answer any members' questions that they've got about the COVID update.
Thank you. Over to you, members. I haven't got any raised hands. Okay, thank you. Now move on to item 7. This is the Audit Wales review of corporate resilience. I'm assuming, Sean, you're going to introduce this and then invite Eros and Nick to go through their report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, members. As the Chair said, this item is to present the findings of a review that was undertaken by Audit Wales last year into the authority's resilience. Auditors were looking to provide assurance on how well each of the FRAs in Wales is addressing the financial and capacity challenges facing all public bodies. So joining us today, as the Chair mentioned, we have Eros Lake and Nick Selwyn to present the key findings of their review work. So I won't seek to paraphrase or to steal their thunder, but just to note that in relation to the conclusion of that review, it was that the authority, having already demonstrated its short-term resilience, now needs to turn its attention to the medium term. That was the key finding, if you like, the conclusion. There are 3 proposals for improvement, which you will have seen from the report. These relate to the effectiveness of the authority's governance arrangements, succession planning within the service, and the location of fire stations. So without further delay, I will pass you across. I'll invite Eros and or Nick to, I'm not sure which is starting, but I'll hand over now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, Chair and members, and thank you for the invite to today's meeting. What we've got to do is to run a presentation that we've pulled together, which will hopefully capture and summarise the key findings. So Eros is going to share screen. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
Okay, can you move on to the next slide, please, Eros? Just to put our work in context, it's probably important to reflect that we have certain activities that we're required to undertake as an organisation, and we only cover certain aspects of the work that you provide as a service. So the one thing I would sort of
We've lost your sound, Eros.
public money is being spent, well managed. Secondly, to how public money is being used to meet people's needs. And then finally, to focus on identifying opportunities to improve how public bodies deliver their services and really making recommendations that can help organisations like the Fire and Rescue Authority to deliver its services more effectively and efficiently. I think the one thing we would say in respect of the last year, it's been very unusual, not just for ourselves and how we've delivered our work, but obviously for you as an organisation. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Eros? And in that respect, Audit Wales changed the focus of its delivery programme to look at ways that we could support the public sector to respond to the impact of the pandemic. So at the start of the pandemic in March of 2020, the Auditor General took the decision to delay our on-site work to give public bodies like yourselves the opportunity to respond as best you could to what was quite a challenging and difficult time. But we also sought to change our work to focus on two things. Firstly, we developed what we called the COVID Learning Project, and this was a way of us identifying and capturing good practice from bodies on the ground through your learning and experience and how you responded to the pandemic, to share that widely across Wales and elsewhere to ensure that the things you were doing well, that were novel and really effective and improving your services, others could learn from. So that piece of work allowed us to identify some really good local approaches in North Wales Fire. And on this slide, we've just listed 4 the ones that we felt were really worthy of merit and have reported widely across Wales. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Eros? In addition, we also undertook what we called our COVID Learning Week back in February, March time, and we produced a specific output on the role of the Fire and Rescue Authorities. And we were really grateful for Richard participating in that exercise. And if you're interested in it, there's a video specifically capturing the work of the Fire and Rescue Authority alongside others in Wales, including Richard's contribution, which provides some real information about how you responded to the pandemic and what you've learned from it as an organisation. And we're really grateful for Richard's participation in that and the agreement from North Wales Fire to help us deliver this work. Can you move on, please, Eros? In terms of resilience then, what we've sought to do is identify and give some assurance about how well placed you are as an organisation and how resilient you are in responding to what has been a very challenging 12-month period. And the basis for our work is taken from some research undertaken by the New Zealand and Australian Resilience Organisation. It's a body that's been set up in Australasia to support public bodies to respond to crises and disasters as they occur. A lot of their work emanates from the Christchurch earthquake about 10 years ago. And they've identified what they consider to be the key indicators, the key areas you need to think about in terms of how you respond as an organisation to a crisis. And they're in the sort of outer boxes in this triangle. There's 13 in total. Basically, it boils down to 3 key areas: leadership and culture. Is the organisation planning to respond to an emergency? And does it have the right internal systems and networks in place to be able to do that? Can you move on, please, Eros? In terms of our work, we set an overall question, as Sean correctly pointed out: how resilient and sustainable are your services in the medium term? And we boiled those sort of 13 areas down into 5 core strands. How well you're set financially, how well you're governed, do you have an agile and responsive workforce, your assets and technology and how they're being used, and your plans for business continuity. Can you move on, please, Eros? In terms of methodology, we produced the terms of reference, discussed that with the authority, and then we drew on a number of sources of evidence. Firstly, our existing knowledge of the organisation, and we reviewed a range of key documents. We met with members and officers to discuss your approaches and understand how services were being managed on the ground. And then finally, we produced a report which we provided to officers for comment, factual accuracy, and the report before you is the output of that resilience review. Can you move on, please, Eros? So as Sean said, I think the key thing we would want you to take away as members is that you responded well in the pandemic, and we consider you to have very good resilience in the short term. What our report flags are probably a number of areas where there are some opportunities for you to strengthen aspects of the organisation in the medium term. I'll now hand over to Eros, who will briefly run through those 5 key areas.
Thanks, Nick. Before going into the detailed findings, the first point I want to make is to consider the period we've looked at and what that really means in terms of context. Now, this is not some exact science, and it varies really in different contexts. But generally, I think most people would see short term as something in the next year or 2, medium term then somewhere in between 3 and 5 years, and a long term covering the next 5 to 10 years and beyond. In terms of our overall question, Nick has referred to our focus on long-term resilience, but in reality, we have looked at the medium term as well. So what does that mean in the context of North Wales Fire and Rescue Service? I guess the purpose of making that point really is to draw out the links to the corporate plan you've put in place. Corporate plan, obviously a 4-year plan, but clearly with a vision and implications going well beyond that defined period as well. There are clear links between our review and some of the objectives within the plan as well, such as making the best use of resources and developing the workforce. So it would be reasonable to consider the findings from our review in the context of the service's ability to meet the corporate objectives. So in terms of resilience then, the first of the 5 elements we covered was looking at your financial position. Exhibit 3 in the report shows that the authority's revenue budget has fallen by 8.4% in real terms over the last 10 years, which is roughly the period when austerity measures were in place. It also shows that the budget in North Wales how it compares with similar authorities according to the SIPFA profiles. In terms of our conclusions on your financial position, we highlight the authority's good track record of managing within budget. As you can see, I think it's Exhibit 2 in the report. We also highlight the reserve levels, which have remained fairly stable in recent years and have started rebuilding more recently, and are around 9% of the annual expenditure here in North Wales. The medium-term financial strategy that we reviewed, it reflects a good understanding of the operating environment and identifies a number of risks, some of which are common to all public bodies, to be fair, including the uncertainties around funding now as a result of the economic impact of the pandemic. We also highlight the need for regular scrutiny of the financial strategy to ensure that it continues to reflect and address those ongoing risks. One of the difficulties highlighted in the strategy is around managing demand-led pressures. The report highlights the need to develop budgeting and financial skills of officers more widely to help address that point. In terms of governance then, our overall conclusion emphasises that you've got an appropriate governance framework and a structure in place. Within that framework then, there is an opportunity through regular challenge and scrutiny for members to play a more central role in addressing the risks facing the service. Clearly, governance has looked very different to how it normally would over the last year or so. Looking back over the past 12 months, the report sets out how the scheme of delegation has worked well, how that has enabled officers within the service to make dynamic decisions and to respond effectively to the challenges around the pandemic. But the last 12 months have also highlighted the pressure on senior officers. So at a senior officer level, then there is scope to devolve decision making within the service, and officers that we interviewed as part of our fieldwork were well aware of that issue, both in terms of the benefits it would bring by improving efficiency and reducing pressures, but also in terms of the challenges around doing so, by things like empowering individuals to make decisions, and really addressing that point can help the authority to be more agile and flexible and dynamic, which is ultimately going to help in terms of your resilience. Going on to the workforce then, and firstly to look back at the past year. The pandemic has clearly shown how the culture and the can-do attitudes of officers within the service have helped to overcome significant challenges. We use the term kind of well-drilled here, and that there's quite a bit more about that in terms of business continuity arrangements, which I'll touch on later. I think mobilising a well-drilled workforce, you can probably say that about any events that you respond to as a service, but we're really kind of looking back at the past year, how everyone has pulled together corporately as well to pitch in is clearly a strength. And in terms of the workforce, obviously officers have clearly gone above and beyond over the last year in responding to the challenges of the pandemic. And in terms of our fieldwork, internal communication and the way in which the authority supported staff through formal and informal initiatives, they come out as clear strengths and things that have clearly helped to maintain staff well-being. The main risk in terms of the workforce, which is a more general point, I'd say not limited to the past 12 months, is the risk in terms of workforce planning and succession planning more specifically. We recognise the challenge for the organisation in this regard, but we feel there's probably some scope to build on what the service is already doing in terms of succession planning, the Future Leaders Programme, and just by expanding the experiences that officers receive, so that there's a plan B and a plan C in place when people leave, and the people who need to step up have some experience of those roles. In terms of assets then, we find that the authority's got good examples of integration and co-location, and that the authority has good arrangements in place to maintain assets strategically. And over the past year, we also highlight that obviously the use of technology has clearly been essential to support new ways of working. The conclusion we come to here is that there are questions really that the authority needs to ask itself to provide assurance that the ownership of assets really reflect what you need to be able to provide the best possible service across the region. On a more general point, I guess that the world is a very different place now to what it was a year ago, or just over a year by now. And as a result, obviously the potential use of assets can also be different. So it's a good opportunity in that sense to ask these questions. They can be difficult questions to ask, and probably even harder to answer. But from a resilience point of view, it's important that you do so before circumstances dictate that you have to. In terms of business continuity, our fifth element that we looked at, the report identifies a number of strengths in terms of business continuity. You've got a number of plans in place to ensure business continuity, as well as arrangements to ensure that officers are familiar with those plans. It's also very encouraging to see that there are steps and arrangements in place to learn from experiences of the pandemic and to feed those experiences into business continuity plans for the future. In this section of the report, we also highlight some examples of how the authority's done things differently over the past year. Nick mentioned our COVID learning project is something that we highlighted there as well. And one of those is to kind of support community resilience as well, things like finding new ways of providing safe and well advice to people and providing people with information to help them to help themselves. So overall, we feel business continuity is an area of strength for the authority. The report covers 3 proposals for improvements, as Sian mentioned in her introduction. I'll hand back to Nick to go through these quickly and to summarise and conclude our presentation before we take any questions. Nick.
Thanks, Eros. So just to recap, we've made 3 recommendations in terms of how we feel as an organisation you could improve your resilience. One is really around the governance arrangements and to evaluate and take the good things that you learned through the pandemic and how you delivered your governance services to ensure you build on those and use them to strengthen how you make decisions going forward, particularly the streamlined approach, the online meetings, those sort of things. Second one is really around the workforce, and we felt that your high potential candidates program was a really good way of you identifying the future leaders and the future managers of the organisation, and that's something to really think about building on to strengthen and address some of the workforce issues that we've picked up. And thirdly, really around the asset base and to think about how you use your stations to provide the services you need to provide. That's not suggesting you should be closing stations or opening new stations. It's very much pitched around understanding what demand's going to look like in the future, based on your experience and learning from the pandemic, and trying to match best how you deliver those services with what you have as an asset base. Before, as Eros quite rightly pointed out, some of the decisions are forced on you as a result of changes in public funding. Can you move on, please, Eros? So in conclusion, I think what we would say is that overall, we felt the authority responded really well in the pandemic, and we think you've got good short-term resilience, your systems worked, your finances operated effectively, decisions were made, staff responded really positively. We recognise there are some challenges ahead in the medium to longer term. I don't think these are things that you're not aware of as an organisation, but probably and helpfully contextualising them in this way allows you to think about how you can respond going forward. And that's really where we would see the changes needed. It's less about jumping in and making decisions immediately. It's about learning from your experience of the pandemic and identifying the things that work well and taking them forward and looking at where you need to change what you do in the future. So hopefully that's given yourselves as members a good insight into our review and what we found. And as Eros said, happy to take any questions that members may have.
Well, can I thank you both if you'd like to take your that's lovely. Well, first of all, can I thank you for the report and the positive comments you've made about the service. Before I actually ask members for their questions, I'm going to perhaps give you an update, really. I accept how difficult it is when you're literally looking at a snapshot of the service to perhaps acquaint yourself with all the information of what we do. But I'm going to address the three proposals you made in Sean's report on page 9. And you in the report, you actually make comment on the fact that as an authority, we hadn't met for 8 months. And the authority gave authority for anything to be dealt with via correspondence. I think the other fortunate thing was that in terms of this committee, we'd actually completed our planning proposals for the following 12 months, which really left then for officers to actually expand on and develop further. So, you know, I think that's, you know, a reason why. Plus, the other factor is that both the Deputy Chair and myself had regular meetings with the Chief Fire Officer, and you'll have probably picked up that he kept staff and ourselves fully informed of what was happening in the service, and members knew that if they had any specific queries, they could come back to me. I always feel in terms of scrutiny, the fact that perhaps scrutiny issues aren't perhaps minuted to the degree that perhaps you might wish. I think perhaps that's a disservice perhaps to the author of the report. You'll see on a particularly our governance report later on that how detailed it is, and that's typical of the reports we receive, that the actions are written down and the time scale as well. And I think that's a credit to the officers themselves. In terms of your second point, in terms of succession planning, I think it's a credit to our Chief Fire Officer that he took the view that it really would be incumbent on the new office holder to actually put their preferred structure into place rather than for them to actually inherit a structure. So it's not the fact that it's not in hand, it's more the fact that it's delayed, I think, for the right reasons. In terms of the third item that you raised in terms of the resilience of the authority, you'll be well aware that we're really dependent on Welsh Government really to decide on what the future role of the firefighter is going to be, plus the fact that we don't know what additional duties might fall on the fire service post the future final report for the Grenfell tragedy. So I think in terms of sort of planning that way, I think we really need to know what particular role we may be given following that. I think the other factor too, which I feel we need time to see what happens, you'll be well aware that there are far more people that are likely to be working at home now than before, and whether or not that actually has any beneficial effect in terms of recruitment to the RDS service, which obviously is one which has been well documented and highlighted. And perhaps you might like to expand a little bit, really for the benefit of members. I probably know what you mean by this, but perhaps an explanation as to optimising emergency response. So I'll leave it for either of you to perhaps expand on that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If you 3 points you raised in order. So the first one around the governance system, I think what our report is highlighting is that we believe that the system you operated in the pandemic was right and appropriate. And what we're suggesting is that you think about how you can streamline decision making going forward, learning from that experience. Are there things that this committee, for example, doesn't need to be involved in, or are there things that the authority meeting doesn't need to be involved in to free you up to focus on the big strategic issues? So we're reflecting back that we felt what you did was the right thing and it worked well. It wasn't intended to be a negative finding in that respect. The workforce part, fully accept the feedback and your expectation that Simon's successor would have the opportunity to shape that planning process for succession. I guess the point we're making is that we felt that was a good system and worked well. And the final point on, I guess there's two things. One is vehicles are being used and what other options are available to the fire service to deliver services. And you quite rightly point out that's tied up in some decisions that the Welsh Government are currently thinking through. They've given some implications that they believe there's an opportunity to widen the role of firefighters. That's yet to be concluded, as you correctly point out. But that is one aspect of optimization. The second one is about your asset base and how you use that. You correctly pointed out that you are dependent on funding from Welsh Government. We've been living in very uncertain times in the last 12 months, and we know the public sector borrowing is at probably levels that far exceeded what was expected 12 months ago. So it is likely to be an impact at some point in terms of funding. What we're flagging back to you is that you need to consider how best to deliver the services you're responsible for in what may be a very difficult financial settlement for you as an organisation. So hopefully that's picked up on those particular points.
Can I just add to that, Nick? You might have covered this briefly, so I think your connection dropped for a second. It's just around the timescales that these proposals cover as well. There's no particular timescales attached to them. It's obviously this is with regard to the point you mentioned around the implications for Welsh Government decisions around the role of firefighters, which has a knock-on effect on the workforce, as well as the point around assets as well, and what you need to optimise services. It's as and when that you feel that you can make those decisions, particularly around the workforce, that are the things that you should take into consideration going forward.
Well, can I again thank you both. My purpose really was just to update you with the information that perhaps you might not be familiar with. And as always, we'll address the recommendations you've made in due course. But I've got a couple of other speakers that have questions for us. I've got to ask Deputy Chair Dylan Rees for the question.
Thank you, Chair. It's very pleasing to note that overall this is a very positive report, which is to be welcomed. I'd just like to hone in on the 3 recommendations for improvement. And just to ask Nick and Avos, are these recommendations unique for us as a North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority, or bearing in mind that you have reviewed 2 other FRAs, are there similar threads in the recommendations for the other 2 reviews that you've carried out? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. I can confirm that the issues we're highlighting are pretty common to the others, specifically the ones around asset usage, workforce, and governance. Indeed, slightly different variations. Financially, you're in a different position to the other 2 authorities because you don't have the same funding benefits as South Wales Fire and Mid and West. But certainly, the broad themes that we've picked out are very common to the other FRAs in Wales, and I would imagine common to others across the UK.
Thank you. So the recommendations, therefore, are quite generic.
Okay, I've got the next speaker is Mary.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd.
Thank you very much, Chair. I take it that there is translation this morning. Is there a translator? Yes, there is a translation service. We have the report. Can I second the Chair's response? I think he has put things together and summarised them. In the recommendations, if I can look at those, I don't have a question as such. So I just think that we should add to this a little bit at the end, that we accept the proposals under section 11 in the reports. I don't know whether it would be possible to reword it, and whether the Chair would be happy to accept that.
In what way, Mary?
The only thing that the report said is to ask the members to note, not to accept them. So I think.
Well, on my page, under recommendation 5, it's to note the findings of the report.
Yeah, note is not to accept.
That's what's there.
What do we know, Vin?
All I'm asking is that we accept the proposals in the reports, and not to note them, but to accept them. What do the officers feel?
Chair, if I can, and I'm interpreting Councillor Davis's proposal as being that not only to note the findings of the review report, but also to accept the 3 proposals for improvement contained within it. Am I correct?
Yes, Sean.
Well, yeah.
Thank you, Sian.
Do we have a seconder for that? And okay.
Michael Dixon.
I haven't got anybody else with questions for either Nick or Iris. So can I thank you both for the presentation again this morning, and hopefully we'll see you face to face when the next audit is due. So can I ask members then, the recommendation's been amended to note and accept the findings of the report. Are you all in favour? Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move on to item 8, strategic risk management. I think, Sean, you're taking this one too.
I am, Chair, thank you. As members are aware, this is a routine report. We give a regular overview to members of the strategic risks facing the authority. And as a reminder, as you'll see in paragraph 5, this is defined as an event that, should it occur, would impact on the authority's planned outcomes and or the delivery of its core functions. So that's how the risk register is pitched, if you wish. The summary report is presented to members twice a year under normal circumstances, but clearly this normal regular pattern was interrupted by the pandemic last year. Nevertheless, we're back on track now. As you'll recall, we don't bring the actual register to the meeting, but the chair and the deputy chair review it in detail prior to the meeting and are able, therefore, to provide assurance to yourselves that it is being updated by officers, and also, obviously, they bring a helpful challenge to officers on its content at those meetings. Again, to refresh your memories, the Strategic Risk Register calculates risk levels as they currently stand, firstly, and as they might be in future, assuming, of course, that any corrective or countermeasures have been effective. We have to make that assumption. The calculation that we make is based on the combination of two things, namely an evaluation of the likelihood that something might happen. And that ranges between being very unlikely or almost certain to occur. And the second strand is an evaluation of what consequences this might have if it did happen. So that ranges between something being quite insignificant in its consequences or have major repercussions. That gives us a risk score that translates to a low, medium high, high or very high risk rating. So if, for example, something is almost certain to occur and would have major consequences, that would have a high risk rating. Whereas almost certain to occur but with only minor consequences, a lower risk rating. That's how it's worked out. So we go through that process to get the risk ratings for the present state, and as I said, we do the same calculation for the current state, assuming countermeasures have been effective. So if I could refer you to Appendix 2 of your report, you'll see a summary of the risks according to the current risk rating and an indication of how they could look in future. And as you'll see from the charts there, the overall picture is, as you might expect, that things improve, that the risks go down the scale as countermeasures are put in place. So they move, if you like, to the right of that chart. I won't detail all the risks contained in the report, but I think it is worth expanding a bit on the information against the very high risk rated items for the authority. And the first one, as you'll see there, is an attack on the service's computer systems. You'll recall, no doubt, that this has been very high on the risk rating for some time. And unfortunately, the risk of cyber attack remains, and our reliance on computers inevitably increases the risk score. We do work hard. An awful time is invested in staying ahead of would-be attackers, using a range of measures such as ICT health checks, cybersecurity software, staff awareness, constant vigilance, and our IT staff themselves spend a lot of time ensuring that our systems, through various different means, are as secure as they can be. And in the extreme, we have something alarmingly termed disaster recovery, because nevertheless, as you will know from your own county councils and indeed from your home computer systems, this is a constant threat, if you like, from externally. We can't just rest on our laurels ever. We have to be constantly on our guard. And as we continue to rely on computers to run the service, then that has to remain on the very high risk rating. The second on the rating at the moment is about keeping our heads above water, metaphorically speaking, in the face of something like a pandemic, and how badly the authority could potentially be affected if recruiting and training new staff wasn't possible, if we were depleted in some way, or that the authorities simply couldn't function. Even if we manage to reduce the likelihood, as we've seen recently, the likelihood of things happening, COVID security measures can reduce the likelihood of us finding ourselves in that situation, but the impact of failing would still be very serious indeed for the authority, and hence it does put it in that very high risk rating. And third, associated risk in a way, it's not identical, which is the impact of losing key staff suddenly. And by that I mean staff with specialist knowledge or specialist experience. We are a small organisation, and quite specialist in areas, and at times rely on a few people with quite specialist knowledge and experience to keep things running. And replacing them, if they were to leave or not be available, would be a simple matter of just taking somebody else on. So we have to address this risk through trying to manage it down through different means, such as simplifying some of our processes so that inherent knowledge and experience is less critical, and by codifying some of our processes. But obviously that runs the risk of increasing the computerization of systems, which then feeds into a different risk. It transfers it slightly into that area. So again, this is something that remains on the very high risk level. So that's in summary of the very high risk entries on the register. As I said, with planned countermeasures, we have to make the assumption that those risk levels will drop. But in all honesty, we know that no sooner have we managed to close off
ACO Morris.
I think the internet's very unstable this morning, Alvin.
It is. I'm wondering if ACO Morris could turn off her video to see if that helps, but it doesn't look as if she can hear me. Hopefully she'll join us back soon.
You're on mute, Sean.
Oh.
Apologies, Chair. I dropped out completely then. I don't know if was that just myself. I completely lost connection for a brief while. Did everybody else continue, or was everybody else affected?
We're aware of the internet being unstable this morning. You carry on.
I'm not sure at what point. I was just saying, Chair, that rather than go through the other risks in the appendix, that perhaps if members have any particular questions about something that's not particularly clear, I'm happy to take questions on that. I assume, Chair, that you heard my review of the high risk.
Yes, indeed. And I think I'm pleased you've actually highlighted the purpose of the strategic risk register. And I can confirm that the Deputy Chair and myself actually did review this prior to it coming to the Executive. So I've got a couple of raised hands. So first one is Roger Parry, your question. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering in respect of climate change, is that a significant risk to the fire service or not?
It's one that could potentially affect our operations in terms of, as you're aware, a lot of our activity is weather dependent, climate dependent. We need access through roads and so on. So there's the potential. And as you're aware, in our corporate plan, we are moving towards developing that environmental strategy. So therefore the actions, the countermeasures, if you like, will be caught up in some of that work over the next few months and years.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Mary?
Diolch yn fawr unwaith eto.
Thank you very much once again. Can I thank Sian for that report? It's a very concise report, and I do propose that we accept the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Merrick. Do you have somebody second it? We note the report. Okay. All in favour? Thank you. Now move on to, thank you, Sean. Move on to item 9, annual governance statement, and Helen's going to take this item.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. The purpose of this report is to present the annual governance statement, and that relates to the period 2020-21. I'd like to start with a very brief background. As part of the production of the annual accounts, the authority is required to prepare what is known as an annual governance statement also. This document provides an overview of the governance arrangements in place, and we've spoken about those at length today, and also provides assurance that they're operating as intended. So it's that opportunity once a year to look backwards and say, what are our governance arrangements like, and then also to look forward. The document that's in the pack today is normally presented to the Fire Authority in June of each year, and that meets the final accounts reporting timetable. We've taken the opportunity of revising the timetable to enable yourselves as members of the executive panel to receive the statement ahead of the submission to our external auditors. And as part of the audit, it's not formally audited, but the Audit Wales will look through it and ensure that it's consistent with its own knowledge of the authority. The context of the statement is that the authority has overall responsibility for ensuring that the governance arrangements are in place, and we are required to demonstrate that we operate in accordance with the relevant laws and regulations, that public money is safeguarded and properly accounted for, and that resources are used appropriately to achieve the agreed priorities, and in a manner which delivers economy, efficiency and effectiveness. You have hopefully noted the positive comments already made by Audit Wales in the previous presentation, and confirmation that our governance framework is appropriate. The core governance arrangements are derived from the authority's constitution, and key to this is an effective committee structure, a scheme of delegation to the Chief Fire Officer for the day-to-day running of the service, including the financial regulations and contract procedure rules. And other arrangements are in place which include the planning working group, a standards committee, the officer-led executive group, and effective internal audit arrangements. So a very broad set of arrangements. And what they do is they provide the bones of the governance structure which members can rely upon. That said, governance is a very wide term, and to support the authority in demonstrating that its arrangements are sufficient, a framework has been jointly prepared by SIPFA and SOLIS, SOLIS being the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives. And what the framework provides are 7 areas of governance against which we need to review our arrangements. So in very brief terms, the first area relates to transparency and accountability, making sure that not only are we doing the right thing, but we're being held accountable and we're doing it in a transparent, open manner. Behaving with integrity is core to everything that we do across the public sector. Engagement, ensuring that we engage not only with our communities, but with staff and also with other public sector bodies. Defining our expected outcomes, recognising that we exist to deliver a service and being clear about what that might be. Also monitoring the achievement of those outcomes and reporting them. Management of risks and effective performance, and we've just spoken about that. And then lastly, capacity, capability and leadership. And that was something that was discussed also by Audit Wales, just making sure that we're fit for the future. The report that's been prepared has been prepared against those domains and is contained within pages 18 to 35 of your papers today. And within that, it sets out the specific arrangements that we have in place against each of those domains. Members will also appreciate the complexity of these arrangements that range from internal matters relating to our staff, our connectivity and relationships with public sector bodies, and also the third sector in North Wales, and lastly, how we engage with our communities. And throughout the report, members will note the way in which it's been necessary to adapt to the challenges posed by COVID-19. And again, we've discussed those at length this morning. Notably for us, the principles of transparency and accountability were maintained as we moved to virtual meetings, and our business continuity plans were found to be effective, and we maintained our operational responses throughout the pandemic. We also fully supported the North Wales response through our membership of the Strategic Coordinating Group and also as part of our civil contingencies role, providing additional support as appropriate. And again, we've spoken today as part of the Chief's update in relation to supporting ambulance driving for Welsh Ambulance Trust and also the support for the vaccination programme. What I don't propose to do today is to work through the detail of the 7 domains individually, but I would like to highlight to members the forward work programme that we have in place for 2021-22. A key component of any annual governance statement should be a forward look to either enhance or develop the governance arrangements. So I'd like to just briefly talk about each of those areas. First and foremost, it's a review of the standing financial instructions, and that very much is the financial governance framework that we work to. A full review of the financial regulations will be undertaken, and that should provide assurance that they're suitably comprehensive and reflect the actual day-to-day controls that we have in place. The second area of action for us is continuing with our cybersecurity work, working towards Cyber Essentials Plus. I think this year has also demonstrated the ongoing reliance that we have on technology, and it is very much an ever-evolving area as technology develops. We have made significant strides and achievements in this area, and it's very much monitored on a monthly basis, but it is an area that we will continue to work at. Thirdly, will be our environmental strategy, and the requirement for the public sector in Wales to be net carbon neutral by 2030 places an obligation on all of us to develop environmental plans. And this remains a key strategic goal for us, and this work will be progressed. We've also spoken today about the Grenfell disaster and the impact that that might have on our fire safety regulatory environment. The impact of it isn't yet fully known, but we will continue to work throughout the year to assess it and to ensure that we have both the capacity and the capability to meet the changes as they arise. We've spoken at length today about business continuity, and whilst we rose to the challenges of COVID-19, it is important that we critically reflect and take action where necessary, not only to embed the arrangements that we've got in place, but put any improvement measures that we can. And then the last action that we have proposed for next year is the transitional legal challenge on pensions. The national challenge in relation to the pension reforms in 2015 continues. And what we will do is keep abreast of the requirements to put remedial actions in place. It is a very technical area, and it's actually very personal to those involved. And we will work with the other fire and rescue services and also the National Scheme Advisory Board to ensure that this is facilitated. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have in relation to the annual governance statement.
Thank you, Helen. As I said at the outset, and I'm sure members will have noticed that the report itself is extremely detailed, and the information there, as I said under item 7, that the actions are listed and the timescale as well. So before I ask somebody to actually move the report, any questions? Roger?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, can we more diversify the issues besides putting fires out in the future?
I'm awfully sorry, I didn't catch that. I think your connection is a little bit poor.
Okay. The fire service, I believe, in the near future or in the long-term future, the they will have to, or possibly, diversified. Will that have a burden on the budget? Diversification, will it have a burden on the budget?
Thank you. If I could just repeat that back to you, because I think you were dropping out. So effectively, the query is if we do diversify, broaden the role, the impact that would have on the budget. I think that probably links back to the discussions that we've had on the medium-term financial plan. And I think is to provide assurance whenever we do our budget planning, that is something that we do that forward look. We just ensure that we understand exactly what the demands are going to be on us within the planning period. We're not always able to capture those, but where there are uncertainties, we identify what the uncertainties are and indeed the risks. So I think by way of an assurance, future developments is something that we absolutely do consider. But yes, invariably it does increase risk and uncertainty.
Okay, I've got no further
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Roger. I've got no further raised hands. I'll take you to the recommendation on page 16, item 7. Are members prepared to recommend an approval of the governance arrangements and action plan? Thank you, John and Dylan. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Right, well, thank you, Helen. Go to item 10 now. This is performance and governance arrangements. I think this is back to you, Sean.
It is, Chair, thank you. Well, the purpose of this report is twofold. One is to provide an update of the latest situation regarding national arrangements for performance and management of fire and rescue authorities. And secondly, to propose a way of making sure that the authority continues to comply with existing arrangements or requirements, but with an eye to future changes if and when those changes materialise. So to remind members, this arises from the introduction of the new Local Government and Elections Wales Act, which, as you'll recall, makes provision for making changes to performance and governance of fire and rescue authorities. But there is no clear set date yet by which those changes must be introduced by Welsh Government or the Welsh ministers. It's quite a complex piece of legislation, as you're aware, and some are through commencement orders and others are through a series of required actions, put it that way. So what we're anticipating, what we know is going to happen at some point, is that there will be changes requiring the publication of a new national framework for fire and rescue authorities in Wales, new performance management arrangements, so things like indicators and plans and so on, and also disapplying the Local Government Measure 2009 for fire and rescue authorities. There has been disapplication already, I think, for the county councils, but not for the fire and rescue authorities. And that 2009 measure has been the basis of our planning and performance regimes since 2009, so it's very well embedded at this time. What will come afterwards, it will be a new corporate planning regime, a new national framework, so that'll give new or revised or updated priorities for the authority to aim to achieve, and new performance measures by which government can check whether or not, or to what degree we are progressing towards meeting those government priorities. Alongside that, of course, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the requirements to set objectives in the long term, and other pieces of legislation that require or that influence our planning and performance regime. You'll also be aware, as the executive panel, that for the past few years we've followed the same pattern, which is rooted in the local government measure of annually setting up a planning working group that looks at potential new objectives for the next financial year. That usually starts around about the spring. We then go out to public consultations, summer, autumn, and we talk about budgeting for the December meeting and write up the detailed plans January, February, March to start in the next financial year. But given that we know that legislation is about to change, we're just not quite sure when, and also considering the authority already has a corporate plan in place that was passed by the full authority in March for 2021 to 2024, the objectives are already set out there and the underpinning planned actions are already contained in that. There is quite a lot of sense, I would suggest, in not looking to add at this time to add yet more objectives, because I think the complexity of doing that would probably not good timing. I think by the time the national framework has been published, the next iteration of that, and that we have a clearer view of the performance regime and performance and planning regime that will come in, then this report recommends that we wait until we get that clarity. We'll be much better placed to develop something once that clarity has been forthcoming, should we say. Once that statutory landscape is clearer. So the recommendation, Chair, is as set out in paragraph 6 of the report, that in anticipation of the changes, that the authority focuses for the time being on the long-term objectives and shorter-term plans that it already has in place and that it already has published in its 21 to 24 corporate plan. That, I think, putting it as succinctly as I can, Chair, but it is quite a complex legal situation at the moment. But those are the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'm sure members have read your report and digested it. Any questions, members? Right. Well, can I have somebody? Sean's highlighted that it's on page 35, item 6. Members prepared to propose, have somebody propose we accept the 2 recommendations there. Thank you, Michael, and seconded by Anne Davis. All in favour? Thank you. Again, thank you for your work on this, Sean.
Thank you.
Right, we'll have a verbal report now on the Emergency Service Mobile Communications Programme. So it's over to you, Richard.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. This is a verbal update on the Emergency Services Mobile Communication Programme, Esmcp, which is delivering mission-critical communication system known as the Emergency Services Network for the emergency services across Great Britain, replacing the existing airwave system. It's a very complex technical programme with a large number of stakeholders, cutting across a number of government departments and devolved administrations, which has been running since 2012 and has endured severe delays. In fact, the airwave system was meant to be shut down in 2019, following all Wales going on to the new system in 2018. However, this hasn't happened. The current position is that the programme has produced a full business case, which will progress through governance over the next couple of months, culminating in a review at the Central Government's Major Projects Review Group in mid-July 2021. The programme considered a number of options and has concluded that The incremental delivery of the emergency service network is the preferred option. And that will go along, meaning that there will be certain areas of the of Great Britain will move on to the new system, while other areas are still on the old airwave system. And it's expected to take 5 years, with the airwave shutdown date of 2026 now being the target. What should the new system give us? It should match and improve airwave's critical voice functionality, but at a lower cost. It should provide significant additional data functionality than airwave, and that's particularly relevant for fire and rescue services. It means that we'll be able to send up-to-date risk information, up-to-date plans directly to incidents to allow incident commanders to make better informed decisions, which ultimately improves firefighter safety. And also, the new system will deliver benefits for the general public, particularly around mobile phone coverage, because the new network is going to be based on the commercial EE network, and there is work going on across the UK to ensure that there is full mobile coverage in all places. I represent North Wales Fire and Rescue Service and the authority on the All Wales ESN strategy group, and we've identified some risks for Wales and some significant risks for North Wales. Those being the delivery of a resilient mobile phone coverage. As you're aware, there will be several areas in North Wales where currently mobile phone coverage is poor. What the programme is doing is identifying those areas and then working with the supplier to have new masts put up to ensure that there is coverage across the region. Another risk is resourcing to the resources required to deliver the programme. With every single control room, emergency service control room in Great Britain, every single emergency service having needing to have all the hardware all fitted and working correctly is going to mean that potentially getting people to deliver that in North Wales at the right time is going to be a challenge. And then the most significant risk, of course, is the cost, particularly when we're going to be potentially using airwave and ESN simultaneously. We are working alongside our other colleagues in the emergency services with the Welsh Government, who are the funding sponsor body, and we are also working with them to look at any alternative approaches to funding. Once we get a clearer picture of the budgeting implications and the funding, then I will bring that information to the authority. And that concludes the verbal update, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Just a quick question from me, really. I just wondered how the programme was going in identifying the black spots in North Wales. Obviously, with their own personal phone, you know where they are to some extent, but I just wondered how it was progressing in our region generally.
It's been progressing very well in North Wales. There is North Wales Police, WAST and ourselves have had devices which have travelled the road network of North Wales, identifying where the EE network works and where it doesn't work. And that information has been centrally collated by the All Wales ESN strategy group and then passed on to EE, who are working towards increasing that coverage across those areas.
Good, thank you for that. Merrick, you've got a question?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I thank Richard for that report? Very insightful report. Does he happen to know what's the report is in England to this mess? I'm sure that somebody is auditing these difficulties that have happened by trying to present the system. Thank you.
Sorry, I think I picked it. Is there an audit going on around how the programmes worked? Is that the question, Mr Davis? Clearly, there has been severe delays and there's work ongoing to identify why those delays have happened. There are several issues around it. As I said, it's a very, very complex technical programme. And then we've had other things which have come on. COVID clearly hasn't helped, so the delay has also been increased because of that. But they are looking at nationally of why it's taken so long for this programme to to come to fruition or to even start. You know, one of the big risks being that the airwave system was meant to be finished 3 years ago and is now going to be, you know, 8 years older than it initially was meant to be. But be assured that the airwave system is still working. It still provides that critical communications, and it is still secure. But you know, as time goes on, it will start to cause problems potentially, and that's some of the work that we're doing, looking at that and mitigating those risks.
Ga I ofyn, Mr Cadeirydd, oes na
Can I
rywun?
ask, Chair, is somebody paying for this extension, the agreements, the old agreements that we had? That was problematic, wasn't it, a couple of years ago? How much does it cost us to continue with the old system because of the, and is somebody contributing towards it?
Yeah, the Welsh Government fund us and fund the emergency service in Wales for airwave, and currently the belief is that they'll continue to do that while airwave is still running.
Okay. Dylan, you've got a question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report from Richard. I think Councillor Maverick Davis is quite right to raise concerns about the debacle in the way that this project has been rolled out. I know that there are concerns from the police service about the escalating costs, and I know that Richard said that, you know, that the costs would be reduced in terms of the delivery of this new system. I'm just wondering, are we absolutely certain about that, or is it possible that there will be increased budgetary pressures for us because the system is going to cost far more than was originally envisaged? Thank you.
Yeah, as I said, the idea around the new system was that it would improve the critical voice functionality at lower cost. Clearly, there is going to be more cost the longer that we keep airwave running. The more that's going to cost, because the devices and etc. will start to fail and what have you. But again, we are working alongside Welsh Government to identify any of those costs. Currently, we believe that the Welsh Government will continue to fund the airwave programme until it comes to its completion in 2026. But there is the risk when we're running ESN and airwave simultaneously that there's going to be a larger cost. But again, that is work that we're doing in negotiations that are happening with the emergency services in Wales and the Welsh Government. And as I said, when I identify or we get some more information, then I'll bring that information to the authority.
Thank you. Roger? You're on mute, Roger.
Sorry, Chair. It's not the Welsh Government's actually running this, it's the Home Office that's running this. And the other thing is there's a few countries in Europe, France in particular.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't pick up the second part of it. The first part of it, Councillor Parry, is this is a UK government-run project. Yes.
Chief, you want to come in?
Yeah, Chair, if I may, it was just really to point out to members that the risk around funding, particularly the funding of the extension of the airwave facility, has been a risk on our horizon for some considerable time. Every year we have we have the potential risk, at least, that funding could either be reduced or withdrawn from Welsh Government. So I wouldn't want members to come to the conclusion that somehow we're advising them of a brand new risk. This is something that's always been of concern to us, you know, and to be fair, Welsh Government has, up to this point, always funded that cost pressure for us. I guess linking back to the discussion that we had with Nick Selwyn and Aros Lake, it's impossible to predict what kind of financial pressures might be on Welsh Government and local authorities in the future, and whether or not that funding continues, I think is going to remain a real risk to the authority, particularly as Richard's already pointed out, in that inevitable period when we'll be dual running both systems. Those costs are going to be significant, and I think from a sort of a longer term perspective, you know, speaking as somebody who is about to leave some of these problems behind, the time that this has taken has been just totally unacceptable. You know, the technology has these technologies go in cycles, and my biggest concern is that before we even get this new system up and running, then there will be ideas and plans being put in place at national level for the next generation to come after that, so that we'll almost be in a perpetual cycle of having to prepare for the replacement radio and data system. So one of the things that I think we ought to be hopeful about, or certainly look forward to, would be a period of stability once this thing is finally with us. So the point that has been made, and I think it was Councillor Rees who made it, that the time scale, something that started in 2012 and still isn't implemented in 2021, that's something that really does raise serious questions about it, doesn't it?
Thank you, Chief. Marion, you've got a question?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just leading on from that, really, I'm ever the optimist. Have you noticed any cost savings, or do you think there will be any in the future with remote working now?
Richard?
Are you happy?
Chair, I'm happy to.
Okay, go ahead.
If Marion will accept that.
Yeah.
And it's more a sort of general answer. I don't think we're in a position at the moment, Marion, to notice any cost savings as a result of this. And I think that when the phrase cost savings is used around this project, I think what the people who are in charge of the project mean is global cost savings. And my concern, and it's only a concern, it's not something that we have any direct evidence of yet, but my concern would be that, that the overall project might have cost savings, but there might actually be cost increases for us. And we just don't know the answer to that yet. So, cost savings, I think, when applied to this project, means global cost savings for the project as a whole, rather than we can be confident that there'll be cost savings here in North Wales. There may, there is as likely to be cost increases as cost savings, in my view.
Thank you for that. That's relating just to this project, obviously, but generally, do you think there have been any cost savings at all with remote working?
Oh, are you talking about the way that we've been working during the pandemic?
Yes, and will be into the future.
Sorry, I did misinterpret what you were.
No, you didn't. It was just two sides of it, really.
Yeah, I'll ask Helen to just, I'm sure Helen will be able to give you a short précis of some of the cost savings that we have actually noticed as a result of the way that we've been working over the last 12 months.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that 2020-21 has been exceptional because actually our working from home and remote working wasn't planned, so we just required staff to go home. There's definitely been some savings, and that would be in relation to some of our utility costs around gas, electricity in the buildings that are largely closed down. And there has also been some savings in relation to travel across North Wales. I guess the difficulty that we have in terms of planning is understanding to what extent they're COVID related, that we actually did, I suppose, put on hold some of our non-core activities. So we're currently operating a transition cell, and that transition cell is looking to the future, and part of that will be about saying how can we work from home safely, how can we perhaps get a blended approach. So I think it's probably too early to say with any certainty whether there'll be long-term cost savings and what they are, but But I think it's fair to say that actually that new model will definitely reapportion some of those costs. The important thing in relation to our buildings is that largely some of those costs are fixed. So things like the non-domestic rates, they're a fixed cost, whether we've got 10% of our workforce in or 100% of our workforce. So it's really understanding which of those are fixed costs we have to meet in any event and which of them are variable costs. So it's very much work in progress at this point, and too early to assess with any certainty, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you for that joint response. Thank you, Richard. I'll now move on to item 12, and this is the new local authority regulations. And Gareth, you're going to take this item, please.
Thank you, Cadeirydd. Bore lodau. Morning, members. So many members may well have seen disturbing reports in the press recently about an inability to continue electronic meetings. That is in England only, I will assure you. I will say that right at the outset because I know people may well be concerned about it. In April of last year, the tail end of April last year, Welsh Government, in consultation with the Monitoring Officers Group for Wales, prepared a set of regulations allowing us to have remote meetings like this, and in discussion with us, agreed that it would be very sensible and progressive if those regulations were to be included within the Local Government and Wales and Elections Act Wales, which they were. And so what has happened is the emergency legislation expired at the end of April, and those provisions relating to remote meetings that were in the Act came into effect at the beginning of May. So we're now operating on the new permanent legislation. The provisions are there, therefore, so we can carry on holding remote meetings. The provisions apply both to principal councils and to fire authorities. There are slight differences, and this goes back to the point that Sian was making, ACO Morris was making earlier when she was saying how complex the legislation is. County councils must publish a scheme and must live broadcast. Fire authorities have the ability to hold remote meetings and can live broadcast if they wish. So there are slight differences between what you will experience at your constituent councils and here. However, we can continue to work remotely. ACO Morris, myself, Alwyn and Matt Georgie, who some of you will know as my deputy at Flintshire, who also provides governance advice to the Fire Authority, had a meeting a little while ago where we looked at what changes might need to be made to the Fire Authority's constitution to accommodate the fact that meetings are taking place remotely. So, for example, we have, and so we will be bringing a report to the AGM in June where for your approval, just to make some of the changes so that your standing orders around how meetings work accommodate the fact that meetings might not be taking place in person. That will put then on a steady basis or onto a proper footing all the arrangements for such meetings. I'm not aware, Chair, whether the Fire Authority has the ability to do what's called hybrid meetings. I don't think it does. So I think it's certainly not within the HQ. So I think for the time being, meetings will remain all virtual. I'm looking to others there for some agreement or confirmation of that. I think Conwy County Council may have the ability to do hybrid meetings, whereby you have some people present in the room and some people remote. But I think that's something that ACO Morris and I would need to explore with them to see whether the technological facility is available there before considering whether that is a step that the Fire Authority would itself want to take. Because, of course, it's all very well and good saying, yes, we'd like to get back to that. But if the technology isn't there, then there can be some considerable expense to installing the technology to make that available and to make that technically possible. And certainly my own council has gone through that process. And it was quite expensive fitting out the council chamber in a way that would enable people to return. And even then, it doesn't enable everybody to return. And by way of example, the council chamber in Flintshire is designed to hold 70 members. We think that we could only hold 17 in there safely. Even with, so if we were to have a hybrid meeting, we would have to have 53 members remotely. And the officers potentially, or we'd have to have slightly more than 53 members remotely in order to enable officers to attend with the chair in the meeting room. So there's a lot of challenges there around that will still remain around actually getting back to physical meetings. But in the interim, we are legal, so to speak, in continuing to hold virtual meetings. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Well, thank you for the update, Gareth. You're quite right. Conway certainly exploring possibility of hybrid meetings, so that's perhaps one that you can work on with Sean. I think also that at this point in time, as the Chief Officer said earlier, it's highly likely that these remote meetings are going to continue probably maybe into next year. And who knows, social distancing, as we know it, may well come off the agenda too. So there's so many ifs and what's may happen. I think at this point in time, we should be grateful that we've got the legislation to continue in the present format. So any questions, members? Mary?
Diolch, Mr Cadeirydd.
Just a quick question regarding community councils. As Gareth has mentioned, county councils. Do you say principal authorities only, or do community councils, does it include community councils as well?
Again, Chair, complex piece of legislation. There are different provisions at community and county council level. Community councils can, though, continue to hold remote meetings also. But I don't think they're under the same obligation to hold live broadcasts that you would experience at county councils, constituent council level. You will recall, I mean, Sean's mentioned it today, I've mentioned it today, you'll recall Sean's earlier briefing, Monsieur Morris's earlier briefing on the Act. It really is a very complex piece of legislation, and virtually every section or every provision within it, you have to look to see which authority is the subject of that provision, and sections next to each other within the same part of the Act will have different application.
Okay, thank you for that update. I've got no further questions. Can I thank all the officers for their presentation today, in spite of the obvious connection problems from time to time. And obviously, as a fire authority, we have the opportunity to thank the Chief Fire Officer for his service. But I would just, on behalf of the executive panel, like to thank him for his guidance and contribution he's made that I'm certainly aware of over the years I've been on the executive panel. So thank you, Chief, for that. So can I thank again all members for your attendance, and we look forward to meeting again at the next meeting, and I'll declare the meeting closed. Bye.